got a board of recently thrown tumblers and mug bodies, and we're going to trim the bottom of them. They were thrown yesterday and kept in the damp box all night, and then for the last couple hours they've been sitting out. So you have to know how to judge the moisture content of your clay by feeling it. The initial feel, if it's sticky to the touch, then you know it's too wet. So you want to be able to pick them up without the clay being sticky. And you also want to judge how much it's going to give way when you start to put some pressure on it. So, move this back and forth a little bit. In this case, touching these, they all seem a little bit wetter towards the top than towards the bottom. So these are a little on the wet side. So I'm going to keep that in mind, especially as I'm turning the piece over to recenter it on the wheel. I want to make sure that I don't adjust that wet lip too much and have an issue. So recentering the piece on the wheel is a skill in itself, trying to figure that out. And actually, as I set this there, it's got a little bit of a wobble to it. So that's what becomes difficult, is as you put this back on here, you get the same off-center issues that you may or may not have had when you threw the piece. This whole board of mug bodies was thrown, and then as a last step, I put in a real deep throwing line, sometimes using the edge of the rib. So I purposefully made these cups a little bit wonky towards the end, which adds a little more difficulty when you go to recenter it on the bottom. So just want to make sure that you're paying very close attention to this exact point when you're centering it, and not letting the shake that you might have throughout going to throw you off a little bit too much. So recentering it, you can eventually you can get to a place where you can tap it back onto center. And what you're doing is, as the off-center pot spins around, as it gets closer to your hand, you're tapping back on the pot, and doing that with the centrifugal force of the wheel. It will help. The centrifugal force kind of helps catch the pot. So as it's going around and it's coming closer to my hand, I'm going to tap away a little bit, and I'm trying to tap it back on the center. And as you practice this, you find, a couple times you'll get it closer, and then you might tap it off, and then one time you tap it and it's just right. And what I'm doing is I have my head above the pot, and I'm looking directly ahead of me so that I can see the wheel behind, the contrast of the wheel behind me, and then I'm looking right at this point right here, and that allows me to see if that's going without paying attention to the fact that down here the pot's got more wobbling going on. So eventually you'll tap them all on center, so it's a good practice to try that every single time. And then once you get frustrated with it, then go and use the needle tool to help center your piece. So to center a piece on the wheel using the needle tool, you want to hold the tool directly in front of you and spin the wheel fairly slowly, and bring the tool closer and closer until you cut the side, so it's just cutting into the side. And where it cuts is where the pot is spinning closer to you. So take a moment to find that where that starts and stops, that needle mark, and turn that so that it's directly in front of you. And then gently grab onto the whole pot and just scooch back a little bit. And then I'm going to remember to smooth over that needle mark so that it doesn't get confused with the next one, and go back and test it again. So bringing my needle tool closer and closer until it cuts again. And in this case, I'm going to let it cut. Now again, locating where that starts and stops, the needle starts cutting in right there, and it goes all the way around to right there. So I have a wider area of the mug that's getting cut by the needle, and that means it's getting closer to center. So if you cut a very short line, it's further off center. As you get closer and closer, you start to cut longer, and then eventually it's going to cut all the way around. So I'm going to take that needle mark, line it up directly in front of me, push back a little bit, smooth that over, and we'll go back to it. So spinning again. Now that it's cutting all the way around evenly, then I know it's pretty much on center. So you can use the needle tool to get it centered. Always start by trying to tap it on center, and then once you can't get it, use your needle tool. I'm going to use 3 pieces of clay, 3 clay lugs to attach this mug to the wheel. And when I throw these, I don't throw thick enough to trim a full foot into them. All I want to do is continue the profile of the shape, starting at the lip of the mug, coming down towards the foot. So I've thrown the inside contour to match the outside contour. So at this very bottom here, I can play around with the outside profile a little bit, but it's actually already pretty much established when I threw the piece. So now I'm just going to use the trimming tool on the outside first, the very edge, to just kind of clean it up and smooth it first, and then go and trim it. I'm using the tool is being held by my left hand all the way from the top to the bottom, holding it tight. If you hold it back here, it's more likely to chatter or do something like that. So holding it really tight in my dominant hand, my elbows are in my thighs. The wheel is spinning as fast as I'm comfortable with, and partially to make me more comfortable is I'm going to have my right hand just barely touching the pot, so that if it gets off, if it gets knocked off, I might have a chance to kind of correct it or catch it. So I'm just angling this outside a little bit, and now I'm going to go to the top, and I'm going to start by skimming off some of the clay on the top. And what I've been doing lately is cutting a little bit of an indent into it so that there's a slight indent on the bottom. Not enough. I'm not adding glaze to the inside of these feet, but I'm putting just that little detail in there, that little cut that I put in the top there is going to make it so that when this mug is turned over, you can see that the bottom has been purposely finished like that. And so the final step of trimming is using a sponge with some water and my fingers to compress the clay, so that if I stop this, you might be able to see in the video the difference in the surface between where it's thrown below here and then right where I started trimming it. It interrupts that very surface that is put in there and exposes some of the coarser particles of clay. It also causes some grog pulls where the grog gets pulled through the clay and leaves those scratch marks. So I'm using my throwing sponge here to add some water and compressing the clay by just letting it spin through my fingers. Now I'm using my fingers all just with more pressure to compress those coarse particles back into the fine particles. And this compression is also going to help fight against cracking on the bottom as well. Now I can take these pieces of clay off. It's stuck a little bit because it's wet at the top. We have a trimmed mug. So now we can set this aside and put a handle on it. Trim another mug here just from a different angle. Move my camera on the side that I trim with, so maybe you can see how it's a little different. So starting right away, putting it on center, I use the wheels of, or the rings on the wheel head to get it sort of close, and then tapping it way off center. That with all of those throwing lines and that wonkiness that I put in at the very end, it's making it a little more difficult to get it centered here. I reuse these lugs of clay over and over again, so as I continue to reuse them, I want to get a little bit drier, which doesn't allow them to stick as well to the wheel head, so I'll roll them into a little coil and then get a little water and paint a little line of water on there. Then I put that wet clay down on the metal a centimeter away from the pot and then bring it up to the edge. So again, on these mugs, I'm just cleaning up the bottom a little bit. I'm not really cutting a really deep foot into it, but I'm working on the profile of the foot, the bottom of the pot. In this case, I'm going to cut a little bit of a ledge right at the bottom, kind of a faux foot. Now going to the top, start by skimming off. Cut down in the middle. This is definitely a foot on the bottom of this mug, but it's a very shallow foot. Depending on the glaze application, how runny it is, how much it runs, you can maybe get some glaze in the middle of there, maybe not. Use my sponge. After I remove that clay, just compress it a little bit more. Go. Always turn it over right away and judge the inside negative space. Make sure that that is still the right shape. We're good to go. Okay. Trim a third mug from a different angle. Same deal. Get it started. I can tell that it's sitting at an angle already. Part of the reason why when I make these mugs that are pretty wonky, I don't want to carve a whole foot into them because it might get a little too off center, and then so all I'm going for here is cleaning up the bottom so that when someone's using this mug, cleaning it or putting it in the cupboard or drinking from it, and someone sees the bottom, that there's a finished look to the bottom, that it looks completely finished from all sides. And it doesn't take much time, especially when get into the zone and we're doing it. It takes a couple minutes per cup. Let's put it on there, center it, work on this bottom profile a little bit. I'm going to remove that whole ledge that I had thrown in there. So it removes a little bit of weight from the cups, but it also just makes the profile look a little more finished when it's sitting on the table. So once you're satisfied with that, I'm going to go to the very top, skim that off. Now I'm going to go into the middle, remove a little bit of clay, carve a very shallow foot into it, put that back, get some water on my throwing sponge here, and compress that trimmed area. So the sponge adds water, and then using my fingers to compress all the particles together, which will help fight from cracking. There we go.